Hello and welcome to ThePrint. I'm TCI Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor, and now a few hours have passed since the budget speech was presented, and we've been able to look at the documents, we've been able to see the assumptions that the government is making, and also go into a little bit of the details of the announcements that have been made. And we have a great panel of experts before you to discuss all of this, what the implications are, what the hits and misses are. I'll run you through the panelists. First, we have Ms. Aditi Nayar. She's the Chief Economist and Head of Research and Outreach at ICRA. Next, we have Mr. Samir Kanabar. He is a tax partner at EY India. And we have Mr. Rishi Shah, who's a partner, public sector consulting at Thornton, Bharat. So between them, they can tell us about the fiscal implications, the tax implications, the economic implications of all the budget announcements. So thank you all so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So now, Mr. Kanabar, I'm going to start with you because, of course, the big announcement has to do with the income tax cuts. So would you categorize these cuts and the slab rejigging that has happened as substantial? Because the rebates that they've promised apply only to people earning rupees 12 lakh a year, and above that, people will still have to pay tax according to the new slab. So, is this a substantial move, you feel?
Yeah. So let me put it in 2 or 3 different buckets, and sort of answer this question. One is that we have been given a theme of, giving middle class their adequate share in the economy. And hence, a lot of measures coming in, keeping that theme in mind, right? Whether you look at agri reforms, whether you look at women empowerment, women entrepreneurship, or even the tax changes. So that's one aspect of it. Second is, of course, if you look at India or any country being an inflation-oriented country, and the slab not being changing so drastically, your real income is actually reducing because the slabs are not changing, the inflation is increasing, so money is that left in your pocket also creates a challenge. And then third is a more holistic approach to say that we are not just doing a small tinkering, it's a big message, 7 lakhs to 12 lakhs. Not only that, if you look at, and I'm just jumping the gun, but to give you a holistic approach, they have made proportionate changes to rental income that you earn from 2.5 to 6 lakhs. They have also made proportionate changes to LRS or TCS on LRS from 7 to 10 lakhs. These are all proportionate changes, So they are kind of big ticket measures. If you look at it from that perspective, it is definitely a major thrust. And of course, as FM rightly said, if you are 25 lakhs, around 1,10,000 is the disposable income that is left with you in your bank account for whatever reason, whether you want to make investment, whether you want to spend, whatever.
Okay, and so now, Ms. Nayar, sticking to the personal income tax, the government is expecting a more than 21% increase in the income tax revenue compared to the budget estimates of last year, despite these tax cuts. After including the impact of these tax cuts. So, how is this going to happen? Is this a credible number, you feel?
So, when we look at the overall fiscal math in the budget and we look at the fiscal numbers that have been penciled in for the RE for FY25 and the BE for FY26, overall, the fiscal math is generally looking quite credible. We were expecting the fiscal deficit to come in a little lower than the budget target of 4.9% of GDP in FY25. And the RE has pegged the number at 4.8% of GDP. Similarly, for FY26, we thought that the government would target 4.5% of GDP, but they've gone a tad lower at 4.4% of GDP. So overall, these numbers are quite appreciated by us, and I'm sure the markets will appreciate them too. I think the only sort of quibble I have with the fiscal math is exactly what you pointed out. To me, the personal income tax growth does seem to be a little bit on the higher side. When we take away the tax foregone and we look at a comparison on a like-to-like basis, the expansion required is in excess of 20%, and it's higher than even the expansion that is penciled into the revised estimates for FY25. That to me does And I think that's perhaps one area where the market may have a little bit of a quibble as far as overall fiscal math is concerned.
Okay, great. And Mr. Shah, now looking at the corporate tax revenue that they're expecting, again, they're expecting only a 6% increase in the corporate tax revenue compared to the budget estimates of last year. Is this a kind of admission that even in the next year, corporate profits are going to be under stress a little bit, and so corporate tax revenue is not going to grow by all that much?
I think it's partially correct, but overall, also, I think you have to look at this budget and look at the math and what they've assumed. It's most of the estimates are on the conservative side, right? I'll start with the larger headline number of the GDP, which is like 10.1%. Now, let's assume that we grow. I mean, inflation will be around 4.5. So, are you really expecting the economy to grow at around 5.6% on a real terms basis? Now, based on all of these numbers, I think you can see a pattern emerge that they're in most cases they've taken the route of being more conservative, and hence any kind of upside is positive for the economy. The good part is that even with these kind of numbers, you end up with a fiscal deficit which is below what was largely expected by the markets. So I think overall, I think the maths will work out, but yeah, a little bit of change here and there is bound to happen.
Right. Okay. And Mr. Kanabar, this decision that they made to make income up to 12 lakhs, they're going to give a rebate and basically effectively make it tax free. But doesn't this put a lot more pressure on the people who will then end up paying tax? Because it effectively says that the entire income tax burden is going to fall on people earning more than 12 lakhs.
So let me give a different perspective before I answer your question.
Okay.
As of now, if you look at from personal tax perspective, there are two regimes: old regime, new regime. Right now, by doing this, what they have done is they did not abolish the old regime, but they have made old regime redundant. Right, because now most of the people would want to go under the new slab rates, and of course, there are still benefits of old regime. If you are getting some HRA and all other benefits of around 5 to 7 odd lakhs, people may still want to go under the old regime. But otherwise, most people would choose to go under the new regime. And this is kind of a significant move even to gradually phase out the old regime and sort of, transition people to new regime. So I'm just indirectly trying to answer your question is that the objective or purpose was also to see that most people move to new regime. Second, obviously, if you look at the middle class, up to people earning up to 25 lakhs odd income, and 1 lakh and odd remains at their disposable hands. Also, it was even in before this amendments, also even today, if you look at it, it was only top 15% taxpayers from a personal tax perspective who were largely contributing to the 70-75% odd of the personal tax. So by doing this, I don't think the maths is going to change significantly. Definitely, yes, a lot of people will still move out of the tax bracket. You will file return, you will say I have no tax payable, right? So obviously, it is the people in the higher bracket for whom there is no change, so they'll continue to pay the taxes. Of course, now based on the new slab rates, if any incentive goes to them, that will be whatever marginal effect. But otherwise, if you look at the overall dent, which FM rightly mentioned is a lakh crore on tax measures, all put together, is also kind of hit that government is taking.
Okay, and now Ms. Nayar, moving away from taxes, again, this time the conspicuous absence in the budget speech was any mention of disinvestment. Even last time in July, she didn't mention anything on disinvestment. And even the disinvestment, the target, even though they no longer call it disinvestment in the budget documents, that target has been revised slightly lower than earlier. Whereas the amount of income that they plan to get from dividends, that is projected to increase by quite a bit. So do you see that this is just a larger policy shift from the public sector enterprises policy that they had announced, the disinvestment policy they had announced, Is this a decisive shift away from that?
Look, my sense is that disinvestment is unlikely to take place at a large scale going forward. We may see sporadic disinvestment of entities like Air India, which were loss making. I don't believe that profit making enterprises are necessarily going to see disinvestment. Even if you want to look at what is better for the government in the long term, getting disinvestment one time or getting dividends every year and using those dividends to be able to pay for the expenditure that you want to incur, whether it's revenue in nature or capital in nature. So my
Right.
sense is that the government is going to remain, continue to pencil in modest amounts for disinvestment. If something works out, great. If something doesn't work out, then the hit to your fisc later in the year is also manageable. So 47,000 crore is about 15 basis points. It's not going to create a terrible problem with your fisc later on in the year. In another perspective, it's 1.5 weeks of additional borrowing, given the kind of borrowing that we see every from Government of India. So it's not very disruptive if it doesn't work out. In the past, we used to have, figures like 1 lakh crore, sometimes 1.5 lakh crores. And then when that didn't materialize, that was much, much more disruptive at the end of the year. So I think this is a fair policy. I generally think 50,000 crore is an appropriate amount to pencil in. So 47,000 crore is a little lower than that. So no concerns on that, that I have. On dividend and profit, I'm just going to say that, in terms of the fine print, how much is actually expected from the RBI? Last year, we had a very large amount that came in from them. And the situation is a little different this year. And it is a little difficult to project how much the RBI will be providing to the government in terms of its dividend, between the fact that interest rates have come down on the securities that they hold from the non-INR securities. Their own INR securities have come down as well. And they may need to make larger provisions in the coming months. So not very sure how much the RBI will actually be able to provide to the government, and how that will kind of play into the whole thing. So that's another area where we have a little bit of a concern on the revenue side. Coming back to nominal GDP, I'll just add one point. When we look at the deflator, it's a mix of the CPI and the WPI. So while the CPI is in fact expected to moderate between last year and the upcoming year, between FY25 and FY26, the WPI will be going up a little bit. But I think the average deflator would still be fine. We had penciled in on a real GDP growth of 6.5% for FY26, a nominal GDP growth of 10%. So the 10.1% is quite in line with what we thought was appropriate.
Okay. Mr. Kanabar,
just one point for Aditi. Aditi, this asset monetization scheme which FM announced, 25 to 30, around 10 lakh odd crores. So how do you look at it, and whether they are moving away from divestment to asset monetization? Is that the plan?
I think so. Asset monetization, especially when there is surplus land which is not being used productively by enterprises, I think that's definitely a good way to go to free up that land for productive enterprise by the private sector. Just a small point. Typically, my understanding is that asset monetization happens on the books of the entity, and it doesn't actually add to the non-tax revenues of the government. So that's still kind of an off-budget revenue stream. Normally we talk about off-budget expenditure, but this ends up being an off-budget revenue stream. But I think that's very positive for the economy to be able to free up idle land that is owned by the government or the railways or any other enterprise all over the country.
Absolutely. And Mr. Shah, the other very interesting thing that the budget mentioned was that they're again re-looking at the PPP model, the public-private partnership model, and they're going to incentivize states to go ahead with this. But the thing is that over the past, the PPP model has not been successful. It hasn't taken off. So what has changed now? Why are they again revisiting this?
I think some of the let me put it a little more bluntly this time around. I think one of the reasons why it's not really worked is because the risk sharing wasn't really adequate. The private sector wasn't really ready to pick up the kind of risk that the government was wanting to offload in those transactions. Now, if you look at sporadically across different states, whether you talk about the Northeast, the southern states, or the western states, or even the northern states, there are some projects that have picked up, there are some that haven't. Why does it really pick up? Because you're taking a more tailored approach wherein you're understanding that in a sector what is the exact need of the government to be present. You understand that there is a lack of investment, overall impetus on investments is lacking in the sort of economy. Now you need the private sector to be a part of this so that the government doesn't get into the business of doing business again. So from that perspective, I think this is a fair way to go about it. But again, it will be fairer in the sense that, yes, a larger set of stakeholders will be taken on board. And, I'm guessing the way it will work is the states will be more, responsible for taking this ahead beyond this as well, wherein they will decide the terms of what they will share and, what kind of security do they provide for the private capital owners.
Okay, so as in nothing material has really changed in the model. It's just that now it's down to the states to make it attractive for the private sector to take part.
See, there are the broad level models were already there, right? Which have some of them in terms of road construction and all of that, they have taken shape and done decently well. Let me put it that way. However, there is a whole swath of projects that need to be taken up, which across India, the government realizes that there is a need. The question now becomes, how do you entice the private sector to get into those? Right now, that is a question that the government standalone cannot answer because it is so varied. Right, the concerns of the private sector from starting from just bare bones demand, whether you have the demand for such an investment to actually take fruit, or going beyond that as well. So that's why I'm saying that getting deeper into it, looking at wherever you've had successes and creating maybe a framework which will just work out some of those modalities wherein, and possibly the underlying factor wherein the government takes up a larger chunk of the risk that is on the books for any entrepreneur. I think that is what's likely to happen here.
Right. Okay. So, Ms. Nayar, I mean, this also ties into the fact that they've kind of kept the capex amount flat this year compared to the budget estimates of last year. Capital expenditure is expected to grow less than 1% compared to the BE of last year. So does all of this tie into a larger strategy that the government is now saying that, okay, there's only so much that we can do. Private sector really needs to step in, and of course the state governments also need to do their share.
So look, 3-4 things. First of all, last year being an election year, the budget estimate for capex was really unlikely to be achieved, and that's what's turned out to be the case. Even with this doubling of capex in December, we still need a 25% growth in Q4 to achieve the revised estimate. And it's not unachievable, but it's still a tall ask, right? So we have about a 10% growth between the RE for FY25 and the BE for FY26. So that's one thing. Second thing, if you look at the amount itself, 11.2 trillion, that means that barring the 2 peak monsoon months, in every month, you need a run rate of 1 lakh crore. That's a lot. Month after month to push out that much capex, that's a lot. So let's see if the 11.2 trillion is going to be quite feasible or not. Secondly, if you look at the interest-free capex loan scheme that was placed at 1.5 trillion last year, it got revised down by about 25,000 crore. And again, the budget estimate for this year is 1.5 trillion. Yeah. Here, a few things matter. One is the mix between the tied and the untied loans. Untied states pick up pretty fast. For tied, what are the conditionalities? Does it work out for the state governments? They have to find projects that are appropriate. They have to get them approved. It takes a little bit longer for the money to start flowing to the state governments. But yeah, definitely the state governments are being incentivized not only through this, but also the scheme for the power sector reform-linked additional borrowing of 0.5% of GSDP. Yes. That has been extended. So that's also a good thing because, basically they want that the states should keep the focus on capex. And then the third, of course, element is the PPP element, which, I fully agree with Rishi. I don't think the private sector was ready to take on risk, and they will have to be incentivized to be able to do that. But why are we trying to do this? because we do have the pay commissions recommendations coming up, and we also have the new finance commissions recommendations that we'll be getting in the next few months. So in that sense, the real medium term fiscal consolidation path, I think, this budget was 1 year too early to be able to give us that. They've given us the clear direction that we're moving toward debt to GDP targeting instead of a fiscal deficit, rigid fiscal deficit targeting, and that's good. They've kind of given us an endpoint as well, which is also good. I think a lot of the rest of the details we will really be in a position to understand only by the time the FY27 budget comes around.
Okay, great. So now, okay, this is the last question I'm going to ask all three of you. I'll start with Mr. Kanabar. What we've talked about the hits in this budget, a lot of things that it got right. What are some things that you would have liked to have seen but did not come about? Some of the misses.
Yeah. And before I answer that, one more point that I wanted to articulate on the slab rates which has come in.
Right.
Now, most of the people also have capital gains income. Now, obviously, what they have done is that they have said that if you have capital gains income, then you have to pay tax as per on your capital gains, irrespective of whatever slabs are. You will still pay 12.5% or 20% tax on listed securities based on long-term, short-term. But once your capital gains, or once you cross, your total income crosses the threshold of 12 lakhs, then what happens is that you will pay tax on your income and you will pay capital gains tax. So, for example, you have a salary income of 10 lakhs and you don't have any other income. You are paying 0. Now, let's assume you have a salary income of 10 lakhs and you have 4 lakhs of capital gains. You will pay capital gains tax on 4 lakhs, assuming long term, say 12.5%. And now on 10 lakhs, based on the slab rates, you will still pay the tax. So
I see.
It is only in that scenario where your total income doesn't exceed 12 lakhs, then of course this is what is there for you. But otherwise, the moment you have any capital gains income, you will pay still tax on that, and you will end up paying tax even on your normal salary income, because your total income goes above 12 lakhs, right? So this is something which also one should keep in mind, and it's not as easy as it appears to be, and hence, of course, that should not create a significant dent. I'm sure government would have done their study, how many people are doing trades on the stock exchange, how many people are sort of having demat accounts, etc. So they would have done some analysis before coming to this suggestion. So this is something I wanted to just highlight. And of course, one other important point is benefit on TCS on LRS. They have increased it from 7 lakhs to 10 lakhs. And if it is for education purpose, if it is backed by a loan that you have taken from specified institution, then there is 0% LRS. So of course, there are certain other common man measures which have also been factored in to align with 7 to 12 lakhs, because proportionately from 7 to 10 lakhs is what has been increased for LRS. And of course, these are some of the important points which I want to highlight. But coming to your question, what are the misses? Obviously, there was a need for boosting the manufacturing sector in India, and to do that, there was a situation that the manufacturing sector will see a lower tax rate, which used to be there up to a certain point of time, which was 15% tax rate for corporates for manufacturing. While we are pushing for Make in India, we are pushing for manufacturing high-end goods, whether it is semiconductors, whether it is chips, whether it is electronics, whatever, then this incentive was necessary to be passed on, and people were looking forward it, which has not come. So this is one of the important miss, is what I would sort of highlight.
Okay, great. Mr. Shah, what would you say are some of the things that you would have liked to have seen?
So I was saying that there's a larger concern. I mean, there are a lot of interesting, announcements made and directions given that certain frameworks for investor friendliness, for manufacturing, all of that will be created. I think my concern remains on the execution front. There needs to be faster execution if you really want to grow the economy, and this is not something that is missing in this year's budget or something. This has been a larger concern over the last decade, possibly, or more than that, right? That we know the direction that we are going in, but certain targets need to be set, and we need to say that we will come out with so and so work or scheme or something by so and so time. Because I'll give you the example of what happened last year. There was a scheme on generating internships and all that. Now, that by the time that scheme actually became operational and things, I mean, the year has almost passed. So the idea is that given the size of the economy, given where our aspirations are, given the uncertainty on the global economic front, I think we need to focus on executing some of our work much better. Like Aditi earlier pointed out that, maybe just pushing out that Capex. Do you have a shelf of projects ready automatically to execute as soon as the new financial year starts? I think those are some of those aspects that we can work on better, so that there is more evenly spread out expenditure throughout the year, and whatever has to take effect, that starts taking effect, and you have a better sense of where you went right or wrong throughout the year.
Fantastic. And Ms. Nayar, I will end with you.
I'll just add a very quick point. In fact, a large part of the increase in capital expenditure which is there is on account of new stream under Ministry of Finance, whereas the allocations for rail and road are pretty much flat. So this is going to be very important to see where that money is going to get allocated and how quickly. And that's to Rishi's point. How soon does that execution start happening? Or do we again have the risk that we are going to undershoot on the Capex target?
Fantastic. So, but thank you, all of you. Yes, Mr. Kanabar.
One point again on tax side, while FM did mention that new tax bill is going to come. Now, obviously, and I'm not sure whether there is something kept in store to show something new in the new tax bill, and hence those measures didn't come in the budget, or whether it would be just kind of old wine in new bottle kind of situation. We'll have to wait and watch in the new tax bill. But this is something that we'll have to look forward next week, is what I believe Madam mentioned that the new tax will be introduced. So this is something that everybody would be looking forward and watching it out to see that what's in store in there, and some of the things which could not come here have been sort of passed on into the new tax bill.
Right, absolutely. But I think that's all we have time for. So thank you all three of you, so much for joining us. This has been a very, very insightful conversation. It's given us all a lot to think about. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.